Welcome, one and all. It is I, your Semolina of Cinnamon, your Vicar of Very Silly Attitudes, the Canceller of Cheerleaders, the Arched Back of Frankenberry, and, of course, your extraterrestrial Captain Kangaroo. Today I wanted to talk to you about diarrhea. Diarrhea is normally caused by a virus, or sometimes contaminated food. What are you doing?
Dusting.
Now?
Sure, why not?
I'm in the middle of a show.
Oh, sorry. Do you want me to come back later?
Yes.
All right. Can I have a cookie?
Out.
Fine.
Sorry about that. Unfortunately, that's all the time I have for today. But remember, every person in heat has a story from hell that you have Yeti ears, and all your hats with dew will glisten. And as always, have a letter A.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your Master of Fun and Wonder, your Viceroy of Verisimilitude, your Archbishop of Banterbury, and your Chancellor of Cheerfulness, and of course, your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett, and we are here with Robservations episode number 467. I am, of course, Robcasting at you from inside the Robservatory. You members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity, you imagination connoisseurs who make it all up. It's great to have you. Today is a meaningful day to me personally. It is the 20th anniversary of the release of Bryan Singer's first X-Men film, which came out on this day in July of 2000. And I, of course, had been friends with Bryan for a long time. It was great to see him jump from Apt Pupil over to this film. It was a big leap. He was chosen because of his ensemble work on The Usual Suspects. And at the time, no one really knew if comic book movies could work. It was kind of a crapshoot, to be honest. No one really knew if it would, if you could do like the X-Men. The cartoon had been very popular in the early 90s. And Bryan really was not an X-Men comic book connoisseur. He watched the animated series. I, of course, after X-Men came out right as the DVD craze sort of was hitting the world. And the very first X-Men DVD that came out was a little bit of a bare bones affair. And by the time X-Men 2 was rolling around, I got a phone call. I got a phone call from 20th Century Fox telling me that I was going to be producing the X-Men 1.5 DVD special features and the upcoming X2 DVD special features, which was due to begin filming shortly. And this was on the heels of I had done The Usual Suspects special edition with Dave Parker and Kerry David for MGM's release of that, which Bryan had participated in, and all of the suspects. And it was pretty cool. I mean, I was like, it was very interesting because at the time I was working for Curdy Pellerin, and we were working on, I was doing the Making of Tron documentary, and we had started on the Lord of the Rings extended editions, and I figured I would take the X-Men films in and make them at Curdy Pellerin as part of my day job. My day job was producing content for special features, mostly Disney stuff, and then we were on Lord of the Rings. And then my boss, Michael Pellerin, said, well, I'm not really interested in doing those movies because we're so busy with Lord of the Rings. I'm like, really? I mean, X-Men was pretty great. Then X-Men 2 is coming out, and he's like, no, why don't you start your own company? So I was like, all right. So in 2002, and he said I could produce these in my spare time. So I was like, okay. So I started my company, Ludovico Technique LLC, which is still around 18 years later, still making things. Ludovico was one of the producing entities on The Hills Run Red. Of course, all of my stuff has been produced through my loan-out company, Ludovico, and it was a lot of fun. So I was going back and forth to the set of X2, and we were doing the X-Men 1.5 disc. And the reason it was called X-Men 1.5 is there was some thinking that Bryan was going to add some scenes that they couldn't shoot for the first X-Men, the origins of Storm and Cyclops, that they were actually going to add in to X-Men to up the ante, so to speak, of that release. They actually never did that, but they still called it X-Men 1.5. Here is one of the steelbooks. Here's the X-Men 1.5 steelbook with all the special features that we produced. And then we went on and, of course, did the X2 X-Men United disc. That's the steelbook for that. And what was interesting was at the time, for they used to have the DVD exclusive awards. Variety would put them on, and it was a televised for 2 years. It was televised, and they had best special features, best documentary, and the year that X-Men United came out, I think it was 2003. I think the disc came out in 2003. I was nominated for best special features overall, and also nominated for best documentary of the year, best catalog documentary of the year for Tron, the documentary I'd done for Tron. So I was up for 2 awards at this televised event, didn't win them. I believe Lord of the Rings won, and for overall special features, and then MASH beat out the Tron documentary, which is to be expected. MASH was the film had a pretty amazing retrospective documentary. So the X-Men, I go way back with the X-Men. I love the X-Men. For me, the X-Men were the comic book equivalent of Star Trek. The way I loved Star Trek, I love the X-Men. And I really got into the X-Men I really started reading them. Teen Titans and X-Men, X-Men already existed. I'd read X-Men comics, but I really got heavily involved with X-Men and Teen Titans kind of at the same time when they did their crossover with Dark Phoenix and Darkseid. I love that, and I loved the X-Men. And I was really excited when Bryan was going to do the X-Men film. Obviously, it was how was he going to do it, and what characters were they going to use, and it was a very exciting time. Now, I obviously came on board after X-Men 1 was already shot. So this film that's celebrating its 20th anniversary today, I was not a part of during production. I was only a part of it afterwards when we started on X-Men 1.5, and we were able to go in and get a lot of material that wasn't available for them to use. And I worked with producer Tom DeSanto, and it was a lot of fun. And then I started flying back and forth to the set of X2 a lot, which was incredible. I even shot some introductory stuff for the X-Men 1.5 disc on the set of X2. The set of X2 was incredible. That was the first time Bryan teamed up with Guy Hendricks Dias, the production designer, and it was the Alkali Lake base, Cerebro. I mean, it was very, very, very impressive, and it was a lot of fun to be on that set. And one of the first times that I was on the set, well, not one of the first times, but one of the first times that I was there the first day that Brian Cox worked. And it was when Xavier and Brian Cox and his son, Legion, are being, there's a confrontation between them. Now, Brian had never worked with Brian Cox before, and Brian Cox, I think, was a little bit apprehensive when they were shooting. And, you're spending a lot of money per day on a film, and I'll never forget this. I couldn't believe what I was about to see happen. So they're shooting. Brian wasn't getting what he wanted from Brian Cox. No fault of Brian Cox. Brian Cox had just arrived, a little out of his element. So at noon, Brian just pulled the plug on the entire day. And I was like, wait, what? And this was on the set of X2. Pull the plug. And then Brian had me come back to his trailer, and he said, look, I'm supposed to be shooting all day with Brian Cox. He doesn't know me, and I'm not going to get from him what I want to get from him. And I figured, why shoot a bunch of stuff that we don't have to shoot? I'll come back tomorrow, and it'll be fine. And I'm like, but dude, I mean, you were talking tens of thousands of dollars. He goes, yeah, but rather than waste all that money, we'll come back. Bryan gets a bottle of tequila, and he leaves the trailer. He goes, so Rob, I'll see you tomorrow. Come back to set tomorrow. You have the rest of the day off. And I'm like, okay. And Bryan went and tied one on with Brian Cox so they could bond. And then and understand where Bryan Cox could understand where Bryan's coming from, and Bryan Singer could understand about Brian Cox. I mean, I thought it was like the most insane baller move I'd ever seen. I'm like, oh my God, that was incredible. And the next day, sure enough, they picked right back up with that scene and nailed it. Got it done. As a matter of fact, I believe on that day they made up all the work because they did what they needed to do so quickly that what was going to take an afternoon ended up taking very little time at all. And it's basically, they've shot, you know, what you saw in the film, and it was amazing. That set was a magical set. And in terms of being on a huge big budget production, X-Men 1 had been very profitable for the studio, and yeah, it was an incredible experience. But I wanted to read an article that was published in Entertainment Weekly today. Well, it was on their website, the Entertainment Weekly website, which I thought was pretty cool, and I wanted to read it to you. The Brilliant, Unsettling Legacy of X-Men 20 Years Later. And this was by Darren Franich, and it was published today at 11:30. The X-Men movies were always American movies. They attacked national monuments and protested White House supremacy. The best bad guy tried to save JFK, and the best good guy got an A-bomb dropped on him by Truman. The first film in the X-Men franchise, released 20 years ago today, relies heavily on immigrant labor. Australian Hugh Jackman plays a Canadian. New Zealander Anna Paquin gradually sheds a Southern accent. Magneto and Professor X are both obviously British because they are Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart, even if the characters nominally hail from Europe and New York. That's how things work in the melting pot. Everyone has a code name to mark their new life. They have transformed themselves like the huddled masses of yore, like the Dutch brunette playing an American redhead. So, of course, the final battlefield is the Statue of Liberty. The mutant super team saves the world, although Wolverine has to carve his adamantium claws into Lady Liberty's crown. It's a defensive tactic rich with meaning. Save the statue, but leave your mark on it, too. Magneto is never really a bad guy. He's too charismatic. His actions always sort of justified. The first time we meet him, the beginning of the whole franchise, he's a little boy getting marched into Auschwitz. So the most loathsome character is Senator Robert Kelly, Bruce Davidson, a contemporary demagogue for genetic purity. Magneto turns him into a mutant. Kelly's powers are disgusting, unusual, not really believable as a special effect, but still kind of awesome. The process is unstable, and he turns to goo. Gradual glorious liquefaction. Yes, that was the X-Men franchise, which started on July 4th, 2000, and will end whenever Disney dumps the New Mutants into the bankrupted multiplexes or streaming oblivion. The stories never lined up, the costumes were ridiculous, and the villains were awesome. The whole process was unstable. The series turned to goo, yet it stuck to you. And the most interesting thing about the franchise is that it's over. Oh, the mutants will return in a few years, disamputated into limbs of the Marvel Cinematic Hydra. There will be more jokes, better continuity, less compelling camera angles. Storm will finally have something to do. Jackman will play Wolverine again, and you know he will. It will happen like this. A cameo as himself in Deadpool 3. Ryan Reynolds posting an Instagram of Jackman wearing what will be described as the iconic yellow spandex. A release date for something called Wolverine vs. Deadpool, or possibly Weapon X or Wolverine X Deadpool. Jackman explaining at D23 how this new Wolverine is a different character, a spoof, really. There's always money in the banana stand, but after New Mutants, there will never really be another X-Men movie as we knew it. The 13 films, perfect number, were products of 20th Century Fox. They were the studio's great hope for a cinematic universe in the 2010s. Now, on a related note, Fox is kindling for the Disney World Engine. And Disney could never have made a film as stylish as First Class, as vulgar as Deadpool, as stoned as Apocalypse, as serene as The Wolverine, as terrible as X-Men Origins Wolverine, as accidentally terrifying as Dark Phoenix. That awful do-over already ended the mainline series last year. It was a financial flop, cruelly irrelevant in a big year for superhero movies. Forget Endgame and Joker and Far From Home. Dark Phoenix grossed less at the domestic box office than freaking Glass. It's bad, no question, bland enough to make you yearn for the polychromatic mess of Apocalypse, but the final proper X-Men team movie picks up the saga's unique strand of underground political lore. In the original X-Men trilogy, the U.S. government opposes mutant kind, whereas in the first act of Dark Phoenix, the X-Men are national heroes. James McAvoy's Professor X is a magazine cover boy with a direct line to the president. He is, frankly, a sellout, and it's the 90s, so that still matters. This will be ripe for material for a radical new X era, one where the old revolutionary heroes become the establishment a new wave rebels against. It's right there in the movie's uncomfortable outline. Professor X, we learn, has been dampening the powers of fellow telepath Jean Grey. I had to make adjustments to her mind when she was young, he explains. Gross. Any hashtag MeToo resonance was probably unintentional and eerily ironic given the franchise's past employment of Bryan Singer and Brett Ratner. Yet the X-Men movies are resonant even when they don't mean to be. This comes from the comics, which built up the civil rights analog into brand identity. But I think you have to credit all the franchise's various collaborators for carrying that mood out into the massive global stage. X2 had the great coming out sequence, quite potent in a world so primordial that Satan hadn't even invented Proposition 8 yet. The First Class films embedded mutancy into pop history, bringing the fight right to Nixon's lawn. The Wolverine trilogy casually Forrest Gumped Logan into a century of American wartime. Worth attaching some suspicion to the saga's victim complex, considering the leads are mainly white dudes. Still, a potent metaphor is a potent metaphor. You may start off with Professor X, Killer Mike said in his recent GQ profile, but Magneto got a fucking point. Here's a smart man talking about race in America, using a comparison he knows the whole world can understand. Leave it to Disney to figure out how to incorporate 2020 into whatever the X-Men will look like next. Appreciate one more time just how weird the first X-Men movie really is. A runaway teenager who sucks out life through her kisses meets a metal-skulled bar fighter with memory problems and mutton chops. Meanwhile, a superpowered concentration camp survivor plans to liquefy the United Nations. The only person who can stop him is his loaded best friend, who owns a mansion school for attractive emo kids with a secret parking space for the private jet. Every superhero after Batman Begins duded themselves up in body armor until the MCU made the multiverse safe for fight scene athleisure. In X-Men 1, Professor X dresses his crew up in uniform tight black leather, club ready, or maybe everyone is supposed to look like Catwoman. All the movies that followed are worth watching. Even The Last Stand and X-Men Origins Wolverine are bad in an impressive way, but one fruitful approach would be to skip right to 2017's Logan. It's set in a nowish future where all the famous heroes are gone, and a dark, powerful cabal has prevented any new mutants from being born. Wolverine and Professor X are walking ruins, left behind by the world like a franchise that simply wasn't powerful enough to adapt. The script by Scott Frank and director James Mangold and writer Michael Green earned an Oscar nomination for its rueful power. The Disney buyout inadvertently excavated another layer of meta-commentary. In this dark future, the only new mutants are imitations brought to life by residual DNA. Reboots, basically, and you wonder if that's all we have left in this genre now. In Logan, the old heroes die, and you can only grow new freaks in a laboratory. The kids are all right, but there's nothing left for them. So they go to Canada. Now, I thought that was a pretty great article. I really enjoyed it. Now, one of the things that I think, and we talked a little bit about this on the John Campea show, that I think is the most important thing when you're talking about the legacy of the X-Men, the most important thing is the fact that it proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that comic book characters, even the X-Men with their gigantic cast of crazy mutants, I mean, remember, you've got Sabretooth, Toad, and Magneto together, and Mystique. I mean, these are flat-out high-concept sci-fi property characters. And the fact that they work at all, being led by Ian McKellen's Magneto, is amazing to me. And I think beginning the film in Auschwitz was an incredible feat. And what it said was, all bets are off. You know, comic book characters can now be taken seriously, as fantastical as they may be, and really making sure that Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart grounded those characters so well, Professor X and, of course, Magneto, made you believe. There was credibility there that we'd never seen. Of course, Blade worked, but Blade was a vampire. Blade wasn't a superhero, certainly not the star of the early 90s cartoon like the X-Men were. And it was a really pretty interesting way to go. And X-Men exceeded all expectations. It made $56 million its opening weekend. I know that seems a pittance compared to what movies are making now, but it's a much different time than it was 20 years ago. But I loved it. I mean, I couldn't believe... I still think it might be... I mean, I love Days of Future Past, but as a movie, I was kind of, in awe of what happened in that film. And I still can't believe that it was as good as it was, and how much that I liked it. How much I did love the X-Men.
Hello?
Hello, Brian. How are you?
I'm fine, Robert. How are you?
Well, I was just talking about the X-Men, and obviously today is the 20th anniversary of the X-Men, and I figured, who better to talk about the X-Men than Mr. Bryan Singer, the director and architect of the entire X franchise. So, would you like to discuss the X-Men on its 20th anniversary?
If you'd like me to.
I would like you to.
Sure.
And I think the first question that I have to ask is, and it's a standard question, how did you come to be involved with the X-Men franchise? Obviously, you'd won Sundance with Public Access. You went on to great success in the 2 Academy Award-winning Usual Suspects. Then you turned to a Stephen King adaptation in Apt Pupil. And then suddenly you're directing what was at the time a really risky venture. I mean, no one had ever done a comic book movie like this before, certainly with an ensemble cast. How did you get the job? How did it happen, Brian?
Well, as I remember, it's so long ago, but as I remember, Fox had sent me a script. It might have been by Andrew Kevin Walker. I'm not totally sure. It was a sort of a dystopian story about Wolverine. I didn't quite respond to it or understand it because I wasn't particularly an expert on X-Men. I didn't know the franchise or the universe as well. So, and then Tom DeSanto was working with me at that time, and I knew Peter Rice, who was a wonderful executive at Fox, and I got to know Lawrence Schuller-Donner. Eventually, I had a meeting with Stan Lee, and in the middle of this meeting, he was so nice. Stan Lee was such a lovely gentleman to me. I just found, and I didn't have many films to call back to of my own to reference, so I referenced Usual Suspects a number of times, and he kept asking why I was referencing it, and I said, well, I directed it, and he said, oh my goodness, and he stood up to shake my hand, and I thought, wow, this man is so iconic and so lovely, and I did get to meet him once in college, briefly, and we took a picture together, so I gave it to him as a gift later. Anyways, so, but he was so lovely, and he didn't even really care who I was when I had sat down. He was just such a good guy, and now he knew I'd done this film, and I thought, I got to figure out a way to crack this. So I pondered over it for a long time, and then we made a deal to do it at Fox, which was in '96. Because then I remember going on to do Apt Pupil after that deal had already been done, and then I came back around, and then we made the movie.
Now, if I remember correctly, you didn't read the comics, but you started watching the great '90s animated series of the X-Men.
Yeah, initially I had not been familiar with the comic, and so I decided to study all the character biographical histories. There's a lot of information on the characters' histories, which then, of course, talks about how they interacted with each other in the comic. And then I watched all, I think, 70 episodes of the original animated series, which is fantastic. And then from there, I started reading into the comics, and and that's where the research really began.
Well, one of the things that I think that you did was, if it was another director, it might not have gone this way. but I thought one of the most audacious things about this movie, and indeed in any comic book movie ever, was to open this movie in a concentration camp and start the story with Magneto and learning his origin. Did you ever get any pushback? Was it always the way you wanted to open the film? Because as soon as you did that, any preconceived notions people might have about a comic book movie were utterly shattered.
No, I mean I believe that that's a tenet from the comic book. I of course am fascinated by that period in history. I've touched upon it in a number of my films over the years, and in my studies, even in high school. I'm a Jewish kid, so the Holocaust always is particularly fascinating. Or I wasn't a Jewish kid. I've grown up, but no, I remember my only concern about it was the fact that I was afraid people would think they were in the wrong theater. And they'd look at their ticket stubs and like, honey, are we is this X-Men or something else? But when we did that scene, the background players all dressed in period costumes. There was a lot of rain and mud in Toronto. We used a brewery, and they were very committed to the reality of that scene. They really wanted to honor as much as could be, even though they knew it was a comic book based film. They wanted to really make it feel real and chilling, and so that's how that came out.
Now, of course, the other great thing, like right after that scene, you introduce Ian McKellen as Magneto and Patrick Stewart as, obviously, Professor Xavier, two of perhaps the most perfect castings in all of cinema history. And you had obviously worked with Ian McKellen already in Apt Pupil to such great effect. I mean, he was absolutely chilling in that film. But when you started shooting that scene, get out of my head, Charles, were you convinced, did you know that getting the two of them together, I mean, that really is the crux, that battle between Magneto and Xavier is such at the heart of X-Men. What was it like watching those two guys? Did you know that you were going to have a hit on your hands from the get-go?
Oh, no, quite the opposite. I was terrified this was going to be this could be a disaster, this movie. I didn't know, you don't know what you're getting into. We had cast Wolverine quite late in the process. We were shooting in Roy Thompson Hall, the Senate scene, and I just liked the way the way that building was designed, and I remember that specifically, and I just remember pitching it to Ian and Patrick. Patrick I had met through Lauren Schuler Donner. Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me, Lauren Schuler Donner was in that meeting. She was, had been involved with the project a long time, and so she brought me on the set of a film that Patrick Stewart was doing with Mel Gibson, where he was playing a villain, and he had a cut in his nose, much like the character in Chinatown.
Right.
Nicholson gets his nose cut.
Jake Gittes. Jake Gittes.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So I remember meeting Patrick with this injury on his nose, and he comes down off the soundstage, and we had a lovely meeting, and that worked out well. And then and with Ian, basically the way I presented it to Ian was I said, look, these guys are like, and this is the way kind of Tom Sano presented it to me. It got me excited about it was always because he was a comic book fan, and basically. It's more like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. They each have the same, the same passion. They're just going about different, ways of approaching it. And clearly in that scene, for me, when I was shooting it, I was very conscious that these were old friends, that there was a deep history between them, and that was very palpable when I was actually filming it in the way I filmed it. And the way that Ian is in the darkness, as I recall, and he keeps his back on Patrick, and he knows, he can read his mind, and he's like, but still, it was just two old friends that were at odds, and that was what was the essence of that when I was shooting it that day.
I mean, it's such a great scene, and then obviously another thing, your first Wolverine fell out, and you found Hugh Jackman, which was again. Another great casting coup. I mean, there's a lot of actors that owe a lot to you because, you know, you.
Well, it's funny. It's funny online. You know, he came and then we did a quick reading in an office or my trail. I don't remember, but you can see it. It's on YouTube or something. You see Hugh reading the scene with Rogue in the truck, and he's reading it to me. I'm off camera, but I can hear my own voice. And you know, I looked kind of quite young at that time. So he keeps calling me kid, and it was kind of he was a real natural. And when Lauren showed me him on tape, Lauren Schuler-Donner showed me him on tape, and I knew he's quite tall, so I thought, nah, I don't think this is going to work out. And he was doing, you know, I think he was playing curly in Oklahoma, in England, I think at the time, so we couldn't get him out for an audition. And again, remember, I'm calling this up from old memories, so
Sure.
Forgive me if I'm inaccurate here. But when he showed up, and then we did this reading, I felt good about it. So then we did an actual screen test. I don't know if I've ever told the story, or maybe I have before, so I'll just tell it to you. But we were doing a screen test with the whole crew around after we shot one of the Senate moments inside Roy Thompson out in that lobby area. And we had Anna Paquin doing the screen test with Hugh sitting on two chairs. We were rolling, I believe, 2 cameras. And I was listening to them on a headset, and I stepped away from the set because I knew what they looked like, so I wanted to hear what they sounded like. And I stepped so far away from the rest of the group that a maintenance person, you know, who was doing, you know, after-hours work cleaning up the facility, who had no idea what we were, what we were even doing at that moment. I guess he knew we were shooting an X-Men film. Comes up to me thinking I was a production assistant, and he says, hey, he taps me on the shoulder, and I've got headphones on, so I'm like, oh my God. So I take them off briefly. I look at him, I say, yeah. And he says, is that the guy they got to play Wolverine? And I had this moment. I'm serious. I'm totally serious. I had this moment where I'm like, and I just said, yeah. And he said, oh, cool. And then he just kept vacuuming. And I put the headphones back on, and I was like, whoa. First guy who found out who played Wolverine. I don't remember who it was. And he was just working at that building. And then I went over and I called the studio first, and then went over and offered Hugh the role. And there's a video of it somewhere. It's a little awkward, you know, because Hugh was a bit, you know, like, wow, okay, yes, you know, and he had to figure out schedules and how this was going to work and all that.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Now, another thing, since I have you on the phone and I can ask you this, the obviously costuming was a big deal. And of course, all of the costumes for the X-Men characters are very iconic, but they're very colorful. Everyone still brings up yellow spandex. And one of the things that I thought you did that was pretty brilliant, that at first the fans might have been going bananas over, but it turned out to work really well in the film, was the decision to allow the X-Men to have civilian identities. Like they're not wandering around Xavier's school in their costumes, and then the idea when they go on a mission or they take off in the Blackbird, they put on their black leather, their mission specific leather, which I thought was a really elegant and interesting idea that I know you probably got pushback from, or maybe you didn't, but the fans were like, why is that? And I thought it really did work for the movie. Was that a hard decision to do, or did you look at all the colorful costumes? I mean, obviously when you get to up to Apocalypse, you full on embrace the costumes, but then it was a pretty audacious choice. How did that come about?
Well, it was. I took a look at the 1963 comic, the original, where they wore the yellow and the blue, and I saw them. You know, from that I saw them as a fighting force who were unified with a single color palette. Bob Ringwood, who I was a big fan of, had done the film, his costumes he did for the original Dune series. He was my costume designer for the uniforms. Of course, Luis Mingenbach, who I had worked with many times, was doing all the other costumes. But we brought Bob in to do these because they had to be kind of just different kinds of structures. And so, and then she would, and they would, communicate together and with me. And the reason I guess I opted for black was probably something inspired by the early Ringwood designs from Dune. Who knows? I don't recall at the time. But I did feel they needed to be a unified fighting force. I didn't feel comfortable, obviously, with them dressing in costumes, walking around school for the gifted, and which is supposed to be a school essentially. And so I took a lot of heat for it. But I think a lot of it, the first wave of heat was an image of Wolverine, and it was a stunt suit with a harness, and it got released somehow online, and it really did not. It wasn't Hugh Jackman, it was on someone else, but it didn't look particularly good, and that's when the heat started, and it didn't let up until basically the movie came out, and I understood it completely, and that's where there's a line in about the yellow spandex, just trying to take the edge off, the idea that, but it was really inspired by the early comic, where they were unified, they were a fighting team, and they were wearing the same uniforms. I felt that was essential. And then eventually, as the franchise progressed over the decades, I was able to kind of work in the colors and celebrate those. I know we did, when we I produced and worked with Matthew Vaughn on X-Men First Class, we were able to bring in those blues and yellows, but we justified them because yellow is like Teflon, and that's a whole other story. But it was I think that was what my mind was at the time. And that was that was what it was. But yes, we did. I took a lot of heat for that. And it seems before you do each film, you take a lot of heat for something. So that was that at the time.
Well, another thing too about the first X-Men that I really love is even though you start at Auschwitz and it is pretty heavy, you also leaned in. You have the villains, say the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. You've got Magneto is leading Sabretooth and Toad and Mystique.
Oh, yeah.
Like, and on one hand, you're trying to create this reality, this really believable universe with Xavier and Magneto and even Wolverine starting out as a cage fighter and his mysterious past. But then on the other side of on the other side of the field, you are completely embracing these, well, let's say goofy, but full-on comic book characters. And the tonal shift could have been deadly, but you made it work. You made those really kind of goofy group of characters not only work really well together, but they were scary. And they were great.
I have to say, in the comic, they never were, once I did the research and understood everything, they never seemed goofy. They never remotely seemed goofy to me. I just was afraid that for a general audience that hadn't read the comic, names like Toad or Sabretooth or, might sound goofy or come off goofy, but the characters themselves I always took real seriously. I always thought they were scary sometimes and very, very lethal and different, so then we had the scene where I was able to have Hugh Jackman be this wonderful cipher, I guess you'd call him, or I don't know if that's the right word, but this character this cynical character who could be just as mystified by these tag names or these character names as the audience might be. And so he could ask questions, or what do they call it? Storm, whatever. I forgot how he says it. And then finally, Hugh, without it being in the script, points to Patrick Stewart in the wheelchair and he says, "What do they call you, wheels?" And Patrick just looks incredulous. I mean, that's the most that's not a very cool thing to say to a gentleman in a wheelchair. So. It just caught me, and Patrick's reaction was so precious. So I turned the camera around and I said, "You got to do that reaction again, Patrick, because it's just gold." And that was kind of like the lineup scene in The Usual Suspects. It took the edge off it. It made it made people smile, and it made them accept at the same time who these characters were and move past it and get more into who they really are as, really intense, serious, and sometimes dangerous characters.
Now, I know the film wasn't obviously easy to make. And I'm sure. I mean, obviously, when I was, yeah. I mean, I know it was there's stories there, but it was interesting to me. Like when I came on board and started doing the documentary stuff for X2, I was able to sit down with Lauren Shuler Donner and talk to her, and she didn't go to the premiere of X-Men. She wasn't there when you had your big Liberty Island premiere.
Yeah, we did this really big event on at the Great Processing Hall on Ellis Island. I remember, and we had blimp, fireworks, and stuff. I mean, it was all out.
It was
I wish
huge.
we had that kind of budget for the movie.
Well,
I wish we had that budget for the movie.
Yeah.
But
well, I said,
but it was gratifying to see them, launch it that way.
Oh yeah.
I didn't. Yeah. Lauren. No, there was a reason. I think. Well, you have to ask Lauren.
No, she told me she was scared. She was like, she didn't think
Really?
she didn't think. I don't think that. I think that it's very interesting because I sort of use her as a litmus test in terms of how Hollywood came around on what a quote unquote comic book movie should be. And if you the way if you look at Hugh Jackman's journey that you set him on, he goes from X-Men 1 all the way to the end of Logan, which is an R-rated film nominated for Best Screenplay or Best Adapted Best Adapted Screenplay. And you sort of sent him on that journey because your vision was the correct one in terms of how you were able to balance all of the tonal shifts in the film, whereas Lauren didn't think necessarily that maybe that was the right approach. At least that's what she told me.
Well, we were, oddly enough, I have to make a nod to her. She was always very supportive, and during the process, and involved, of course. So there was never any of that. Oh, as every time, you have your moments, but it was always Richard Donner, her husband's first act, particularly of Superman the movie, that was my greatest inspiration to make the film, showing how you can take these universes and seriously if you want to, and they don't all have to be camp and whatnot.
Right.
Which was Blade had done it. There was and Tim Burton. There had been some stuff like that, but ultimately this was harder because of the it's X-Men. It's like Superman, Spider-Man. It's like all the it's in that kind of pantheon, I guess you'd say. And again, maybe I'm using the wrong words, but at the premiere, I remember it different. It was more during the editing, and I don't know if I ever. Peter Rice was an executive at Fox that I was dealing with quite often, and I've known for many years. He and I took a walk through the parking lot at Fox, and I thought the movie was going to be a disaster at one point. And I remember
Really
turning to him and, oh yeah, this was before it was finished. This was before it was done, but it was almost. And I said to Peter, I said, you know what, if and when this movie is both a financial and critical failure, I will never be able to make one of these again. And he just said, well, let's hope it's not. That was the conversation, but I'll never forget it. Never forget the parking lot and the spot it happened in. And in the premiere, my memories of the premiere were, I remember Spike Lee and John Singleton were there, and I knew Spike, as New York director, and I was very, nervous about, what he would think, particularly because we were having the premiere in New York, and John Singleton and I knew each other from college, and
Yeah.
he's a comic book. He is a comic. As I recall, he was a comic book fan, and then. So and a lot of the other participants were there. I don't want to get my premieres confused. So
No, it was it's on the disc. We did a piece on it. It was pretty star-studded.
Oh, it is, okay.
Yeah, it's pretty star-studded.
It was a lot of people. Yeah, and I thought it was. Oh yeah, I said to Spike, it was like, it's weird we're having a premiere in the Great Processing Hall. I mean, this is where The Godfather, where Vito Corleone comes over in Godfather 2. It's that giant room. It's very echo. And all Spike says, hope the sound is good. And then I remember the windows were still, you could still see light coming through the windows. And then the light kind of faded as the movie began, 10 minutes into the film. My folks were there. And yeah, we took a boat across. I remember that. And then afterwards, I just, I just, we had an after party. Yeah. I'm just having memories as you're talking to me. I haven't talked about it in a number of years. So
Yeah.
it's I can go on forever about memories, and some of them are right, and some of them are just wishful thinking.
Well, now the movie opened. I think it opened to $56 million its opening weekend, which was a huge number, especially. I mean, 20 years ago, the film was a smash. I mean, it was a complete hit. It was a critical hit, and the fans loved it. Was there what's it like to be a Hollywood director, to not know whether the movie was going to be a hit or not? What's it like to get the phone call from a studio telling you your movie's a hit? What was that like?
I was sitting in a restaurant that Stephen Baldwin was co-owner in, as I recall, and somebody came up to me and told me that the predicted Friday night numbers would be what they were, 20-something, or I forgot, something like $1 million. And then I simply did the math in my head of how that would roll into Saturday afternoon when families would go. And Sunday, I knew what it meant. And then that was one part of it. And then the second part is Rebecca Romaine and John Stamos took me to pick up Howard Stern, and we went to the Ziegfeld Theater. And they sat me next to Howard Stern, who I grew up with on the radio. And I was freaked out, the whole time. I'd never seen, I'm not big for seeing my films again after I've made them or in a theater. So here I am sitting in the theater with Howard Stern, who is quite tall, sitting next to me, who has a very powerful, radio presence. And it was around the scene when Magneto lifts up the police cars and he smashes them down. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it was right around that scene, and I don't want to use the F word, but I'll just say effing. But I remember Howard leaned over to me and said, "This is effing great," and I went, "Oh," and it just, all the tension and all the knots in my stomach just kind of released, and then I got a lovely call from Peter Chernin that evening about the movie, and then follow-ups from a number of people, and then the big numbers came in, and we thought this, at the time, I think it was maybe one of the largest openings of a non-holiday,
right,
weekend or something like that, and of course I took great pride in that. But then I made the foolish mistake of staying in New York and waiting for those early, because we got some decent reviews, they were okay. And I thought, I'm going to wait till they deliver the New York Times, the Variety, and the Reporter, and I'm going to wait for all that. Well, that was a mistake, because I opened those up, and they were not so nice. And unfortunately, I had friends with me who were like, don't worry, it's fine, people like it, blah, blah, blah. So,
well, I think,
really, that's my memory.
Well, looking back, I mean, today it's literally 20 years to the day that X-Men came out. When you think back on it all, what impressions were you left with about the whole experience of making the first X-Men? I mean, I know obviously it was a difficult time, hard to do. You never had the budget you needed.
The most difficult time was we were doing a rehearsal on a soundstage with Tyler Mane, who played Sabretooth, and I got a call from Tom Rothman, president of the studio at the time, and Tom called me and said, we're thinking of moving the movie off of the holiday season 6 months into summer. And when he said it, I thought he meant we're going to push the movie 6 months later, and I had this huge sense of relief. But almost in the same breath, what he meant was we were going to move the start date 6 months earlier. And I said to him, this I never forgot. I said, can that be done? And he said, we think it can. And from that moment on, it was like we were jamming to do everything. The nights, the days, we were switching from days to nights to day. I mean, it was crazy. And the schedule and the budget was really, really tight. I think we made it come in at that time at I don't want to say numbers, but we came in. I mean, it came in good, and but it was, and when it was done, yeah, I could see Lauren's point of view. I could see, who knew? I mean, really, who knew? I think there was applause at the end of at the premiere, so I think that made me feel good. But I'm telling you, during those early test screenings, you know, and there were no test screenings; there were small friends and family screenings at the time. It was tough. It was rough, and I credit the editors did a great job. Lauren, all my partners, Tom, and at that time Kevin Feige, you have to remember, was working with Lauren as an executive. So Kevin and I were in my trailer in between setups watching Star Trek and just jazzing on science fiction. So it's so great to see Kevin, now in charge of this amazing universe.
Well, obviously X-Men, you went on and made 3 more X-Men films. It became a big part of your life. And really, I don't think without the X-Men movies there would be the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And some of the films, I mean, obviously not yours, but other movies were maybe less successful. And other movies like Logan, I think, and Deadpool are great films, terrific films. And they did some...
I have a funny Deadpool story. I was walking through Fox when they were doing a very small test screening of Deadpool, and they happened to be outside the theater. Emma Watts said, "Why don't you come in? Do you want to take a look at a rough cut?" I mean, it was really refined at that time, but I walked in and half the audience just recognized me, so I kind of crouched in the back, and every time there was an X-Men related or any kind of joke that was fantastic in that movie, I just busted out laughing, and then looking at it, I'm just thinking, like, it was a really fun experience, but it was really pleasurable and interesting for probably myself and some of the audience.
Yeah, I mean, it's you created a lasting film series that, I mean, those films, just your 4 films, gross what, $2 billion or something, collectively, which is not bad. Now, I don't want to keep you, but I really appreciate you doing this, by the way. Who better to celebrate the 20th anniversary of X-Men with? What would you say, I mean, looking forward, maybe, I guess, if you could ruminate a bit on how and why do you think that the comic book film has not only was it popularized, but it's flourished over the last 20 years to the point of now the highest grossing film of all time is a comic book movie, and a lot of the reason that happened was because of your X-Men films. What do you think it is about now, today, in the world that makes audiences flock to movies about superheroes?
Well, I think there's all the aspirational reasons. We wish, we all wish we could have powers. We all wish we wish for saviors, especially in these particular times now, which are rough with the coronavirus and things like that. I think, but I also, I've always said this whenever I've talked about doing comic book related films. I've directed 5 and I've produced another, so it's been, and I've been in that world for 20 years, and we're over, and I always say, I'll say what I said then. It's our modern day mythologies, and I think people very much, want a mythology. They want to escape the day-to-day life and jump into a mythical world. And in the old days, in the Greeks or Roman day, there was always mythologies. Whether they were the religions or they were the stories, the tales, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the original stories. Narratives and fiction and things like that. So, and then science fiction and books, and eventually the science fiction world of movies, and of course Star Wars. And now here we're now given a new kind of variety, an endless variety of mythical universes for people to escape to. So I don't think it's any surprise that once you had X-Men and then Sam did Spider-Man, and then now Marvel, and now DC and all this. It's no surprise that it flourished to me.
I guess to wrap this up, looking back, do you look upon X-Men? Do you think it's a great movie? Do you think it's one of your best movies? Where does it fall in the pantheon of your work?
I think the movie I'm most proud of, because it was so challenging, was balancing both cast and the time travel aspect of Days of Future Past. But but there's something very special about the first X-Men, to me. And what it is it tells this very poignant, all the fun and all the characters, but it tells this poignant story about two complete strangers that are so unlike each other, Rogue and Wolverine, and they meet, or Logan, and they meet in the middle of the snow in the wilderness, and they go on this very unusually, faceted journey, and wind up embraced in each other's arms, saving each other's lives on the torch of the Statue of Liberty. And I thought, wow, what a unique journey for two lost souls. And I think that's at the heart of that movie, and that's what makes X-Men 1, the first one, so special to me.
Well, that was a fantastic answer, sir. Listen, I don't want to take up your whole day. I want to thanks for taking the call, dude. It's great to talk to you. We got to get together, but thank you.
Definitely. You got to see some of my little things I've been collecting. They're kind of cool.
I know. I want to see your Jupiter too.
I got the bug, as they say.
I can't wait. So, well, listen, I want to thank you very much and congratulations. I mean, 20 years, man. 20 years of X-Men. And look where it went. Amazing.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Rob. It's always great talking to you.
All right, Brian, I'll talk to you soon.
All right, talk to you soon.
I'll see you. Bye. Well, ladies and gentlemen, should I read letters? I hope you enjoyed that. It was nice to, sorry it was only over the phone, but I figured I'd have to talk to Brian today on this day, 20-year anniversary. And hopefully you all enjoyed that little glimpse into the 20th anniversary of X-Men. Now, let's see what people have. Let's see. The first, actually, you know what? I have a great letter to read first. It's a long one, but I really liked this letter, and she wrote it to me, and I asked her if I could read it. And this is from our own Paula Bowlers. And she, for those of you who might be new to this channel, I often lament the fact that our cinematic legacy is sometimes lost on people of today. And the three films that I often cite are Antonioni's Ennui trilogy, Michelangelo Antonioni, three movies that I really like, La Notte, L'Avventura, and The Eclipse, that I particularly enjoy. And I'm always saying that audiences of today would be very hard-pressed to sit down and watch those films. And I always say that, and maybe I'm look, and I'll admit they're difficult films to sit through, pacing wise. They're very different from many of the movies that we would see today, and it's not something that necessarily people would seek out. But I watched these movies first when I was a teenager, and especially L'Avventura, I puzzled over it because it's a very strange, odd film. But Paula wrote a really interesting letter about this, and I've often challenged people on the show to say, look, try watching Antonioni's Ennui trilogy and get back to me and tell me what you think. So Paula wrote back to me, and it's a little long, but it's a terrific letter. Paula Bowlers, take it away. Dear Rob, I apologize for the late response to the challenge to write about Michelangelo Antonioni's trilogy. I will focus on L'Avventura for the purpose of this letter. You proposed that most contemporary viewers would not be able to sit through Michelangelo Antonioni's trilogy. I do agree that there are some hurdles for viewers of this epic, but as we will see, there were also challenges for audiences even in 1960. It is a point of pride for me to have seen many of the films from French New Wave and Italian neorealism. I admire them not as a film snob, maybe a little, but aesthetically and intellectually. The poetry of these films are only enhanced in the case of Antonioni by the magnetic beauty and charisma of his muse at the time, Monica Vitti. Despite my gushing, the first film in the series, L'Avventura, confounds viewers' expectations and would not be satisfying to impatient blockbuster or genre film movie aficionados. In his 1997 review of the film, Roger Ebert posited, Why don't we have movies like La Ventura anymore? Because we don't ask the same kinds of questions anymore. We have replaced the purpose of life with the choice of lifestyle. I think that we can extrapolate further from this comment to our own ever-present obsession with the fantastical choice over the mundane, life's purpose. Ebert admits when he first watched the film at the age of 18 that he could not connect to it. Many reviewers at the time believed it was a film where nothing happened. La Ventura explores what is appropriate behavior in the wake of loss, ponders whether there is a correct time for desire, and whether one should deny themselves because the moment is inappropriate. This is done dispassionately. Events are casually presented without flourish. Upon further contemplation, I believe the narrative structure of La Ventura would be challenging for many viewers of today. We are accustomed to the first act intro, the second climax, and the third conclusion act structure of contemporary and mainstream films. La Ventura defies classic storytelling with a brief introduction to the main characters who are not particularly engaging. The apex of the story arc occurs in the first 20 minutes of the film and is never to be resolved. Anna and Claudia are preparing for a boat trip with friends. They drive to pick up Anna's boyfriend, Sandro. Anna and Sandro make love while Claudia waits outside. They arrive at the yacht where they join two other wealthy couples. They swim. Anna claims she saw a shark leading everyone returning to the boat. We later discover she lied. They stop at a nearby island where they disembark to explore. In the desolate, craggy environment, Anna and Sandro discuss their relationship. This is their first time together after some time apart. Anna appears to be unhappy. Frustrated with the conversation, Sandro takes a nap on a nearby rock. Sometime later, a boat is heard in the distance and seen retreating in the distance. Claudia looks for Anna but cannot find her. Everyone is enlisted in the search until only Claudia and Sandro remain to continue. Here, after the introduction and climax, one would anticipate the remainder of the film would focus on a resolution. What happened to Anna? However, it doesn't. We are left to wonder if she left on the mysterious boat, or did she slip on the rocky terrain and fall to her death? Claudia and Sandro grow closer as they search and console each other after Anna's disappearance. Sadness and confusion turn to elation and passion. Claudia mentions Anna briefly, stating she's afraid she will return. Sandro asks Claudia to marry him. She says it's too soon. Claudia is happy, despite vacillating between guilt and pleasure in her newfound romance. That is, until she discovers Sandro cheating on her at a party. We leave them on the balcony weeping. Claudia puts her hand on Sandro's head, comforting him as he sobs. Film critic Pauline Kael was unmoved by the narrative. In her estimation, both the missing and the searchers are aimless and lost. She wrote, "The characters are passive as if post-analytic. Active only in trying to dislodge their anxiety, sex is their sole means of contact and communication. Too shallow to be truly lonely, they are people trying to escape their boredom by reaching out to one another and finding only boredom once again. They become reconciled to life only by resignation." Kael suggests an ineptitude on the part of the characters. They are enlisted to find Anna, but are so distracted by their desire that they fail to complete the task. To her, the search seemed too difficult for these vapid creatures. I didn't read the film as such at all. I believe that Claudia, who is the only uncoupled member of the group and did deeply care for her friend Anna until an opportunity for her own happiness is presented. Antonioni said he was interested in decorum and propriety rather than focusing on the missing Anna. He was more interested in how her friend and lover respond to her disappearance than the act itself. But we wonder, is it wrong in less than 24 hours of her departure that her best friend and lover become more immersed in their attraction to each other rather than in the missing Anna? Antonioni is unconcerned with the moral compulsions and queries of the viewers. He makes no judgment. As focus switches from Anna's disappearance to the budding and ultimately failed romance of Sandro and Claudia, the viewer's gaze and attachment are thwarted. We do not know the fate of Anna nor Sandro and Claudia. Now that I have potentially talked listeners out of watching this film, why is La Ventura such a seminal and influential film to so many? The open structure of the narrative was liberating for creators who were encouraged, accustomed, and confined to the more traditional three-act format. The skewed framing was enthralling as it augmented the isolation and desolation of the characters rather than being concerned with the golden ratio. Antonioni did not conform to any conventions of filmmaking prior. Jeffrey Noel Smith wrote in his essay, L'Avventura, A Present Absence, what L'Avventura showed was that films do not have to be structured around major events, that very little drama can happen, and a film can still be fascinating to its audience. It also showed, and this was harder for viewers to grasp, that events in films do not have to be, in an obvious way, meaningful. L'Avventura presents its characters behaving according to motivations as unclear to themselves as to the audience. They are sensitive to mood, to landscape, to things that happen, but they also behave in routine and conformist ways. In this way, the events in L'Avventura are perhaps more realistic than what is typically seen in cinema. As in life, tragic events do not have resolutions in a few hours or days. Sometimes we are confounded, as we are now during this pandemic. People are not always ethical or inclined to stay the course when facing tragedy versus temptation. I do believe that L'Avventura and other films from this period have longevity, even if it's only artists, filmmakers, and iconoclasts that revere them. These films remain surprising and consistently offer more with each viewing. Thank you for reading this long missive. Live long and prosper, Paula. Now, obviously, this is the first time anyone's ever written to me about when I bring these movies up, and I admittedly will tell you they're a difficult sit. Some might say a slog. But I'm a particular fan of all three of these movies, and I really want to thank Paula for taking the time not just to watch the films, but also write such an incredible letter. And I think my point is, even if you don't watch Antonioni's Ennui trilogy, and I don't expect a lot of you imagination connoisseurs to do so, what I would encourage you to do is there is so many great movies. Movies that you may never have heard of, that are perhaps off the beaten track, that you just haven't seen before. And I would suggest, or I would encourage all of you to, take a walk, as Lou Reed said, take a walk on the wild side, and seek out things maybe that are out of your wheelhouse, and you might discover something that, hey, could change your life. You never know. You never know. And I want to thank Paula for writing this letter, because what a great letter it was. Sorry, I was stumbling over your words, but really enjoyed that. Now, here is another letter from our chairman himself, Jeffrey Mao. Now, Jeffrey Mao talked about a film the other day called The Swimmer with Burt Lancaster. It's a cult film from the late 60s, a film I own on Blu-ray, a very interesting film. And our chairman has written his review of this film. It's a long one, but I'm going to dive right in. Greetings, Rob, and all the members of the Post-Geek Singularity. Actually, you know what? Before I read Jeffrey Mao's letter, why don't I jump back and see what you guys are saying first? Let's see what's going on in the chat right now. Let's see, where was I? That's from last night. New York State of Throg says, I'm not bragging, so please don't take it that way, but Governor Cuomo has been a stand-up, take-action, no-bullshit leader. This is the type that all of the other states have needed. Just put the politics aside, wear the mask, no different than a seatbelt. I have to tell you, obviously I don't live in New York. I know there's a lot of people that don't like Andrew Cuomo, but I have to say that dude, Andrew Cuomo, was every morning, 7 days a week, every morning he was giving briefings. I haven't watched them. I don't know if he's still doing it. But he was giving briefings during the pandemic, taking sometimes very tough questions, and I was very impressed that he would be doing that. We certainly didn't get that at the federal level until later when people saw that, oh, Andrew Cuomo's doing it. And then even then, certainly, not exactly what, anyway, I was impressed by Andrew Cuomo. So, Throg, I'm with you. Willow is here. Willow says, is it concerning that New Mutants wasn't able to get reshoots done because the actors have apparently aged too much? Do movies generally have pickups without ending up with a bunch of glaring mistakes in them? Well, no, I have to tell you, Willow, that I think over the last 20 years, I think also, well, I know that the movie that really pioneered this for the modern age, movies have always had certain reshoots and things like that. But usually it was always thought of that if there were movies that were having reshoots, that there was a problem with them in some way, shape, or form. But in the case of, say, the Lord of the Rings movies, they had designed what they called pickups, not reshoots, but pickups, because they shot all three movies at once, and movies are very iterative, and things change during the editorial process. And when they were working on the Lord of the Rings films, they scheduled pretty extensive pickups to go in and fix things and fill things in and change things around. And in terms of, I mean, think about it. You're spending nowadays, say, $200 million on a tentpole movie, and you're thinking, we're going to capture lightning in a bottle right now. And the whole idea of that when you get into the editorial process, you discover things that you might not have known on set. So reshoots have now become, back 20 years ago when they were doing Lord of the Rings, not necessarily the norm, but they certainly are now. And I think all of the tentpole properties do build in reshoots or pickups, or whatever you want to call them. It's the only way to do tentpole properties like this correctly, because there's no way you can get everything you need in the can all at once, because things change during editorial. So it's smart to build those things into the schedule and into the budgets now. So now it's not something that affects it. It doesn't affect the final product. Usually for the most part enhances it, especially if you have a filmmaker that really knows what he or she is doing. Then it's always for the best. Now in the case of New Mutants, New Mutants, I think when they were making it, they decided to change the film and make it a little bit different than the movie they first set out to make was going to be. And they just never got around to doing those reshoots. So I think in the case of New Mutants, we're going to get more of, I know that Josh Boone, the director, is apparently very happy with the film. So his original vision remained intact. So I think that is, I think it's great. Royce Freeman says, for X-Men, do you feel the First Class universe is the same as the original films, much like Bond films are the same? Well, they've tried to look, the X-Men, I don't bother with continuity when it comes to the X-Men movies. I kind of enjoy them individually. I think X-Men and X2, X-Men United, are the same universe. I don't think X-Men 3 is something different. And I think First Class, Days of Future Past, and Apocalypse work pretty well. And I have to say, I think the ending of Apocalypse is problematic, but I like a lot of it. I certainly love the first half of Apocalypse. I love just how embraced its fantasy elements. So, there's a lot to like. I have to tell you, I don't even think Dark Phoenix is horrible. I mean, I like the actors. I like revisiting the characters. It's just sad that they've got the Dark Phoenix. I mean, in this day and age, they should have done it as a two-parter and really embraced the cosmic nature of all of it and just gone for broke. They should have made a movie. One of the great things about Infinity War and Endgame is it's so over-the-top comic book. It just embraces its origins. And I think, if anything, X-Men could have used a great big hurrah going out on a high note where you did an epic double feature 2-film science fiction extravaganza and really had done the Dark Phoenix saga correctly. But yeah, I mean, Bond films are kind of the same. I see them all as part of a loose continuity. It doesn't bother me that they don't tie together the way that the Marvel Cinematic Universe does. I think thematically, like I watch Days of Future Past, which I love. I love Days of Future Past. The timelines, that doesn't really bother me that much. I mean, I get it. I understand. Schnip sent in a super chat and says, summer heat waves with 90% humidity like this make me realize I could never wear a rubber suit and defend Gotham City. Well, I'm right there with you. I am right there with you. Emil Johansson says, I was a kid when I saw the DVD of X-Men 1.5. Yeah, I was a kid when I made it. When I made the special features. It was a long time ago. Calvin Bowes is here and says, why do the cancel culture people not go after the studio execs instead of the star, who in most cases just does what he's told? Example, go after Jimmy Fallon and not NBC execs or SNL producers. Is Jimmy Fallon getting canceled? Look, I don't understand. I really don't. I don't like the fact that look, we live in a society where our judicial system works, innocent until proven guilty. People are having accusations made against them that are complete, utter fabrications. And how do you live that down? How do you live that down? I don't know. But yeah, they go after the most visible people, really, I think, Calvin, the people that have targets on their backs. Anyway, Stubble says, do you think Hugh Jackman would have had his career without X-Men? Would he have made it big in Hollywood anyway? Well, look, I didn't say this to Brian, but when I was on the set of X2 doing interviews, I interviewed all the cast. Hugh Jackman is one of the most charismatic people I've ever met in my life. Talking to that guy is like electric. He's so warm and so fun and so inviting and so nice, and he just radiates humanity. So I think he absolutely would have had a huge Hollywood career. I think X-Men, it definitely accelerated it. I don't think if he played Wolverine, he would have been in The Greatest Showman. Maybe he would have, but I don't know. Because what happened with Wolverine, with Hugh Jackman being Wolverine, look, he was basically front and center of the first X-Men movie, and the fact that it made money, that it was a success, people can attribute that to him, and I think rightfully so. So, absolutely. Roger Lee sends in a tip and says, hey, Rob, one of the many industries harmed by COVID is the comic book business. DC, Marvel, IDW, etc. have all taken big hits. Would you say this is a good time for independent comic creators? I'm a bit of an artist, and I've always wanted to do my own comic. Roger, absolutely. Now is the best time. Do your work and get it out there. I mean, during this pandemic, I was able to do all the special features for, oh, wait, I haven't mentioned it today, but let me do so. Of course, a movie I produced, The Hills Run Red, came out from Scream Factory a couple weeks back with 6.5 hours of bonus features created by director Dave Parker and myself specifically for that release. So check it out. Did it all during quarantine. I think anybody who is an artist and wants to get work out, here's if you want to get work out there, you have now worldwide distribution at your fingertips. Yes, everybody, it's just like you make a movie, you want to get a theatrical release. But now if you get a movie, if Tango Shalom gets picked up, or when it gets picked up, and I hopefully can share news about it with you, you just want to get it out there. And now we've got distribution, worldwide distribution at our fingertips. So absolutely. Nick Parrish sends in a tip and says, so Rob, once again, I have to give you some positive news for your day. Well, thank you. So per CNBC.com, biotech company Moderna said that their vaccine produced neutralizing antibodies in all early trial patients, and final stage trials begin July 17th. Well, according to some, that's good news, but according to others, remember, that's just the beginning of Bill Gates vaccinating the entire planet to crush the individual under the New World Order. Don't worry, I don't believe that. But yes, I think it'd be great. So, Rob, I know you're mad at the non-mask wearers holding up Tenet. I am. I know you want to sit in the heated theater recliner. I know you want to feel safe watching Tenet. This is why I have given you these signs of hope in the past week. Do not lose hope. No, I don't. I don't lose hope. I'm the Chancellor of Cheerfulness. I love I love doing those kinds of things, and it's fantastic. And look, this too shall pass. I mean, think about it. We, in the last 30 years, haven't seen this kind of craziness happening all around the world. This is something new we will get through, but humanity has been dealing with calamity. I mean, the 20th century was not a great place to live for a lot of people. So it was here in America, but we'll get through it. But I keep my, as they say in Full Metal Jacket, the dead only know one thing. It is better to be alive. And I love being alive, so hear. Gerald sends in a tip. Gerald says, very cool interview with Bryan. Thank you. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It was nice. I've known Bryan for over 30 years now and I've done 4 documentaries for him. So it's great. So I'm glad, and thank you very much for generously supporting the channel. I appreciate it. Nick Parrish sends in another tip and says, what, Rob, you got Bryan Singer on the show? And I was impressed when you got Barbara Crampton on the show. Your poll continues to surprise me, Rob. You should have told him Nick Parrish is still defending Apocalypse against fools to this day. You and me both, buddy. I'm a fan of Apocalypse, and I like it. Anthony Gonzalez, how are you, Anthony? May the wings of liberty never lose a feather. Our good friend, Jack Burton, and yes. Mukbang Reviews sends in a chat. Hello, Mukbang. How are you? Mukbang says, great letter from Paula. Live chat misses her. We all miss her. I love Paula. Hopefully she'll come back. I've been talking to her about some things. So we shall see. Bunyan Snipe says, Roman Polanski's the Tenant? No. But I love Roman Polanski's The Tenant, and I can't wait to get it on Blu-ray. I'm very, very, very excited. Just Plain Steve sends in a super chat and says, I've always considered X-Men and X2 as the same universe, and every subsequent X film more as a what-if story. Yeah, I tend to agree with you, although I do like Days of Future Past a great deal. But you're not. I don't think you're wrong. Ross Gecko sends in a super chat and says, should Marvel adapt the Death of Wolverine? Hang on. Where was that? Should Marvel adapt the Death of Wolverine storyline, give Hugh Jackman one more go-around before recasting? Dougray Scott was originally cast as Wolverine. How do you think he would have fared? I think he probably would have been good. I like him as an actor. I don't know if he would have been as good as Hugh Jackman, though. Hard to say. It's always tough to come up with things like that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. All I know is that I thought he was great. Our man Anthony Gonzalez is back, and he says, so the minority but very vocal DS9 haters that always complain about the show losing its way always mention In the Pale Moonlight. I don't get it, since Garrick essentially pulled the trigger. If they want to have a gripe, it should be with For the Uniform. Well, Anthony, as you know, I love Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Yeah, there's a lot of people. Here's the thing. Here's what people don't understand about Deep Space Nine and the Dominion War arc, and specifically episodes like In the Pale Moonlight. It's not like humanity went out and started a galaxy-wide war against the Dominion. But once you're embroiled in a galaxy-spanning conflict where potentially billions of sentient beings are dying, the rules of warfare suddenly apply. The fog of war settles in. And look, at the end of that episode, when Captain Sisko is saying, I can live with it. I can live with it. No, he can't. He's trying to convince himself of that. He'll be haunted by that decision for the rest of his life. And rightfully so. And the whole point is, how do you maintain the ideals of paradise in the face of a horrible galactic conflict that you didn't ask for or you didn't invite? And that's what Star Trek, the universe is not about. The universe is indifferent to your suffering. You don't matter. The sun could go supernova tomorrow, and all of human history would be wiped out. And on a galactic scale, not a big deal, really. Nobody would miss us. And we would miss us, but nobody else would miss us. And so, you have to take things as they come. And I think one of the great things about Star Trek and one of the great things about Star Trek Deep Space Nine is, ultimately, during this wartime scenario, the Dominion War, they ask a lot of tough questions. And the real question is, how do people that come from a Roddenberry-esque paradise in the future, a post-scarcity society, what do they do when they're faced with, well, Armageddon? How do they deal with it? Are they able to retain their humanity and still fight? They have to make some very, very tough choices. It's war. And I agree with you. For the Uniform is a perfect one to bitch and moan and complain about. Brendan Sheehy says, your thoughts on Heavenly Creatures, Peter Jackson's Heavenly Creatures, based on a true story. When I first saw, I expected a stodgy period piece. Instead, I got a beautifully directed, vivid fever dream of a film. Well, I'm right there with you, Brendan. I love Heavenly Creatures, and I was blown away, too. The fantasy sequences, the world that the two girls create one another with. I'm a big fan of that film. I think it's a wonderful movie. If not, other than Lord of the Rings, I think there's a good argument to be made that Heavenly Creatures is Peter Jackson's best film. Kazam sends in a tip and says, shame Fox's X-Men ended on a fart like Dark Phoenix. Hopefully, New Mutants is good. I hope New Mutants is good, too. We shall see. Well, here's Jeffrey Mao's letter, as promised, on The Swimmer. All of you go watch the trailer for The Swimmer, Burt Lancaster's late 60s. I don't know if I call it a masterpiece, but it's damn good. Greetings, Rob, and all the members of the Post-Geek Singularity. I wanted to provide that full review of The Swimmer that I had mentioned in yesterday's letter after I finished watching it. To recap, The Swimmer is a 1968 film starring Burt Lancaster, directed by Frank Perry, who I believe, if memory serves, directed Mommy Dearest, from a screenplay written by his wife Eleanor, based on a short story by John Cheever. The version I watched was Grindhouse Releasing's recent 4K restoration of the film, and it looks great. The film takes place almost completely outside, and the colors of the sky, the water, the scenery are all displayed in full effect here. However, the visuals are not the key points to this film. It's the performance by Lancaster, considered arguably the greatest of his career, perhaps even better than his Academy Award win for Elmer Gantry. And the character that he's playing, more specifically, what the heck is going on with him? I was initially considering writing this review spoiler-free, but given that even after telling you everything that happens in the film, you're still left wondering what is really going on. The film gives you no firm answers at all and leaves it up to you to interpret what is happening. There is also no sudden or obvious twist, like all of a sudden everything comes together and makes sense. In this film, Lancaster plays a man named Ned Merrill. The film starts in the wilderness, and we see things apparently from his perspective. He's jogging through the woods, dressed only in a pair of swimming trunks, which is the only thing he wears during the entire film. He comes up on the backyard, the swimming pool of a neighbor's house. The residents are apparently friends of his, but they haven't seen him for a while, nor has he. Another couple comes over, and Ned and they engage in idle conversation. They speak of going to another couple's house and invite Ned. Ned at that point looks down at the valley and ponders that he could swim his way home. He could jog in between houses and then swim through the pools, as they would link up into a metaphorical river, which he names after his wife, Lucinda. The first signs that things are odd are just his sudden appearance, and then he's asked where he has been recently, and he says, "Oh, here and there," whatever that means. The other friends insist on driving Ned over, but he refuses and embarks on his journey. Initially, things go well for Ned. He continues to run into neighbors, crashes parties, and makes idle promises to them that he'll have lunch with them, or call them, or come over for dinner. You get the sense, though, that he really doesn't mean it. Along the way, he meets Julie, a girl that he'd hired as a babysitter before. Strangely, he's surprised at how much she's grown and remarks similarly about her brother. What doesn't make sense is how the girl could have been a babysitter to his daughters, as at the house before, he mentions how he wants his daughters to get married and his house and here at his house, and that there were a number of suitors who just came over. Wouldn't that make his daughters and Julie the same age? Ned convinces Julie to join him, and this is when you get the sense that Ned is kind of pushy. That's how he gets by in life, and as they walk, Julie opens up about having a childhood crush on Ned, even stealing a shirt of his once. Ned had been pressuring Julie to admit more and more about her crush, but things seem innocent enough. However, the mood of the film darkens after Ned twists his ankle while running around an equestrian ring with Julie, hopping over the obstacles as if they were horses themselves. Ned shows great delight in these childlike acts, the same as when he raced a horse previously. Ned and Julie rest, and Ned starts getting creepier and creepier, suggesting that he could escort her to work and that he could protect her. Julie rejects his advances and runs off. From this point on, Ned is alone, and his physical deterioration is then matched by the weather and his mood. He then has an odd encounter with an older couple who like to lounge outside in the nude. There are further indications that Ned's memory is all over the place, as he mistakes the couple's new driver for the old one. From the conversation that Ned has with the nude couple and other hints from before, we learn that Ned often borrows money and never or rarely pays it back. The husband makes no oblique reference to having helped Ned out and being surprised that Ned didn't ask him for money. Ned insists on being invited to the couple's fundraising event, but the wife expresses doubt that Ned can afford the $100 or $1,000 fee. From this point, things really spiral downward for Ned, and the film becomes actually hard to watch. He wanders over to the house where his apparent former mistress, Shirley, lives. Ned continually tries to pressure her to continue the affair, but she keeps rejecting him. Ned starts to feel cold and shivers and complains about the sun no longer warming him, and you almost feel sorry for him. He frequently misremembers past events that he had with her, but the detail of his recollections are so specific that it makes you wonder how he's coming up with them if they didn't actually happen. Ned at this point is so down that he appears totally disoriented, crossing a highway with cars whizzing past him and some people throwing garbage at him. He then makes his way to a crowded pool club and begs the attendant to let him swim, not having the required 50 cents. He eventually borrows 50 cents from a somewhat reluctant man who we later find out is an owner of a restaurant that Ned used to frequent. Ned then proceeds to swim through the very crowded pool, only to then be confronted by the restaurant owner and another man who owned a business that Ned also patronized. Both owners complained about Ned not paying his bills back and also referring to his daughters making fun of him and also getting into some kind of trouble. Ned's defensiveness becomes more and more delusional to the point where he shoves one of them, runs back home to find the home completely deserted and overgrown. It starts to thunderstorm and the film ends with Ned trying to open the front door and then curling up like a ball after failing to do so. So like I mentioned in the beginning of this letter, the film doesn't give you any details about what is actually going on with Ned, what happened to his family, and why his house is deserted and overgrown. You're left with more questions than answers about the reality you have just seen. Is Ned real? Is he a ghost? He seems real enough to everyone that he talks to, but they all express surprise to see him. Where do they expect that he was or has been? One person mentions that it has been a year or two since seeing him. He has an encounter with the character played by Diana Muldaur, who seems to suggest that she had a relationship with him, as she's none too happy to hear him mention his wife's name. There's enough hints that something bad happened to suggest the bad thing is why his house is empty and why we never see his wife and daughters. Ned has only one answer when asked where they are, and that is that his wife is waiting for him and that his daughters are playing tennis. If they're not really home, then why such a specific answer? He mentions the tennis court later when he says that he used to flood the court in the winter and his daughters would skate on it. When Ned returns home, the camera shoots him crossing the same tennis court with the net hanging down to the ground. In closing, this film is definitely not an easy watch, especially towards the end. I don't know that I'll watch it again anytime soon, but I'll probably watch the extras, and the concept of the film is quite fascinating, and you get insights into its making. I would definitely suggest that you watch the film for an episode of Elizaviews, as the conversation about it would be quite interesting to hear. I think everyone will have a different opinion about what is going on in the film, and it's a shame that more people won't get a chance to watch it. I can see why it has cult status, because it's way out there, and it's almost completely unlike other films of its era. In some ways, it totally defies easy categorization, and I can't even really say what genre it falls into. I do recommend that everyone who sees it give it a watch, and let all of us know what you thought about it. Thanks, Jeff. You know what, Jeff? It's funny that you and Paula, you write about the swimmer, and Paula writes about L'Avventura on the same day, because in a way there's I think there's some really interesting things happening in both films that might have some similarity to one another. But another great letter. Thank you for writing in. Very much appreciate that. I've got a few more letters to read, which is always fun. And let me get them here. Okay. This other letter, let's see, is from Anthony Johnson. Anthony Johnson writes, Dear Robert, this is my first time writing to any show, and I can't lie, it's a bit daunting. With the high standard of letters you receive from Willow and others, I hope you don't mind this not being as eloquent. Absolutely not. A few days ago, it was revealed that Julia Sawalha, who voiced the character of Ginger in 2000's Chicken Run, will not be rehired to reprise her role due to her age. Aardman Animation sent her a letter stating some of the voices definitely sound older, and we're going to go ahead and recast the voice of Ginger. Sawalha has posted this news on her social media, and obviously the Twitterverse and news channels have picked up on this and frequently condemned the decision. Voice actors manipulate their voice, and it is their job, and so masking their age or gender in a role in what is what they're paid for. 10-year-old Bart Simpson is voiced by 62-year-old Nancy Cartwright, and 24-year-old Elsa in Frozen 2 being voiced by 49-year-old Idina Menzel are just two examples. Then, while reading some of the comments, I noticed a trend starting. Quite a few of them were connecting the decision to recast to the character of Rocky. Rocky was a laid-back American rooster voiced by Mel Gibson. The overall consensus is that the roles are being recast in a way to not rehire Mel Gibson due to his past problematic behavior. Which brings us to the topic of my letter. I wonder who decides the timeline for forgiveness in Hollywood and who determines the severity of an offense. I am a white, heterosexual Christian male and therefore have no valid opinion on what Mel Gibson said regarding Judaism or homosexuality. I have been able to watch representation of my faith, gender, color, and sexual orientation on screen all my life. I cannot begin to understand the feelings of a black man in my cinema screen standing and shouting, Yibambe! With excitement when T'Challa reappeared in Endgame, or the feeling of a homosexual might have when watching Brokeback Mountain, a film which helped advance queer cinema in the mainstream. I have grown up watching Mel Gibson and movies from Forever Young and The Man Without a Face, to being shown Braveheart when I was 12 because this is a masterpiece of cinema, my father proclaimed, which it is. Mel Gibson is a great actor and a master director, but hasn't he completed his sentence of social isolation and condemnation? As highlighted by you and John Campea, we are in the midst of a very confusing time when it comes to persons, actions, and the Hollywood studios' repercussions on social backlash. James Gunn gets fired from Marvel but immediately gets hired by DC. Kevin Hart stepping down from hosting the Oscars. Liam Neeson's interview on Good Morning America. Hartley Sawyer was fired from The Flash show and are now revisiting the comments by John Wayne. While I understand that the words these celebrities have tweeted out and said in interviews or were caught on camera saying can lead to some people being offended, I don't see why the actors are being punished for having an opinion. If it's an unpopular opinion, yes, but everyone should be entitled to their own. They are not directly inciting violence or trying to change others' opinions. In many cases made these statements years ago. Recently, old homophobic and racial posts by WWE wrestler Jackson Riker resurfaced. WWE refused to fire the wrestler as these posts' opinions are counted as free speech, and to terminate his contract would violate his First Amendment rights. I don't see how this can be a valid reason for the WWE, but not for Hollywood studios. I love Emma Thompson and admire her decision to step away from her role in Skydance Animation's film Luck, but what about the time John Lasseter was sentenced to? He was never legally charged with an offense or crime. He stepped away from his position for 6 months and then left a company he helped create. Second to Walt Disney, John Lasseter is the most influential person in animation history, yet we're still getting backlash for trying to change and move on. He has continued therapy and is trying to continue to revolutionize the business. Yet on the other hand, a director who is a wanted criminal has continued to work with the bigger actors and has been awarded the highest awards in the profession, but receives no repercussions at all. In March 1977, Roman Polanski was arrested for raping a 13-year-old girl and fled before his reported sentence of 50 years in prison were given. Since that day, Polanski has worked with Sigourney Weaver, Johnny Depp, Frank Langella, Adrian Brody, Ben Kingsley, Ewan McGregor, Jodie Foster, Christoph Waltz, and Kate Winslet. His films have been awarded 8 Academy Awards, 6 BAFTAs, and 7 Golden Globes. Mel Gibson, for saying anti-Semitic and homophobic slurs, is still getting a backlash, both socially and professionally. James Gunn was fired for disturbing and unfunny tweets. Kevin Hart was the center of a massive witch hunt, but because he expressed his personal opinion, which he is entitled to. Twitter society and trying to cancel his career. John Wayne is being projected as a racist in a time when racism was wildly accepted. Roman Polanski is a child rapist, but still gets top-tier actors, multi-million-dollar budgets, and awards. There seems to be no consistency. The current climate is full of landmines. What can you say? What can't you say? Taking excerpts and dissecting them without taking into account the time and the society in which they were made. In 1971, racism was still widely accepted in the U.S., so it's understandable that some racist comments and views were expressed. In the 1980s and 90s, there was still blatant sexism in the workplace, leading to harassment and sexist comments. It was in 2001 that the final state in America decriminalized homosexuality, so it's understandable that Friends and other 90s shows and films had homophobic comics and views being expressed. Now we're seeing a push for trans and other non-binary sexes to have the same courtesy. I'm not saying that at the time these comments were not hurtful, degrading, dangerous, but I feel at some point a line needs to be drawn, a line that stops people being afraid to stand up and say, I made these comments at a time socially when it was widely accepted, but it was still wrong. That, yes, I apologize for the damage they may have caused, but I intend to live by the current social standards going forward. We shouldn't judge past opinions, comments, and media by today's standards. We should learn from them and use them as a lesson of what not to do going forward. Cancel culture and social media in general gives me massive anxiety and depression. I am sure at some point that everyone has been made a wayward comment or action that would have been taken offensively by others. That the comment may have caused hurt or emotional distress to others, but we are learning, and only by giving a safe space for people to own their past digressions can they start to learn and understand the weight of their actions on the correct path forward. Sorry I've rambled on, but I feel you've provided a safe space to have an open and meaningful discussion regarding this topic. And again, I feel we need to be educating, not condemning. Thank you for everything, Rob. Your show, your opinions, your openness mean a lot to a lot of us in the Post-Geek Singularity. Also, very sad to hear the loss of Kelly Preston today. She was my very first crush as soon as I saw her in Twins. All the best from Wales, Anthony. Well, Anthony, you ask a lot of good questions. I honestly don't know. We're supposed to live and grow and learn from our mistakes, and a lot of people do, and yet these mistakes keep getting brought up again and again and again and again and again. And I think you're asking very good questions. I don't have an answer for you. Like what I don't understand is I mean, I go after J.J. Abrams because I don't like what he's done to Star Trek. I'm very public about that. I'm very open. I'm very honest. But I mean, if I don't like his take on a fictional mythology, that's no reason to go after him. And look, everybody's done bad things in their lives. I'm not absolving anybody of any responsibility. You have to learn and move on. But people getting canceled and taken off the board for extended periods of time, if not forever, I think is a mistake. He who was without sin. And yeah, Kelly Preston was a tough loss. But it's frustrating to me that what happens now is that it just seems people are gleefully going out and destroying other people. And that to me is like, go make something. So I think it is a dangerous, dangerous, crazy time we live in. But thank you for that first letter. Please send more just like it. Well, maybe not just like it, but please send more in. I very much enjoyed reading that letter, even though I've been a bit scattered today. James Kevins is here. James Kevins says, greetings, Rob. Relax, no politics today, no cancel culture, not even human alien mating rituals. Well, not much anyway. I think you'd agree with me that Matilda May from the movie Life Force can park her comet around my planet any day. I agree. The reason I'm writing today is that the trailer that dropped for the show Star Trek lowered expectations. Now, before you say it, I'll admit that, yes, it was a bit unfair to judge an entire show based on a single trailer, but the point of a trailer is to entice you into coming back for more. There's nothing in that trailer that made me want to see any more. As crappy as the Picard show turned out to be, it still had pretty decent trailers. I'll even confess that I've never even been a big fan of humor in Star Trek. Trouble with Tribbles is pretty low on my list of favorites. I thought the best parts of the voyage home were the beginning and the end scenes. Still, small bits of funny dialogue can ease a tense moment. The Stone Knives and Bearskins line in City on the Edge of Forever, or the Ferengi episodes of Deep Space Nine, when used sparingly, humor and sci-fi can be very good. Galaxy Quest, Futurama, Tripping the Rift, Richard Benjamin's Quark, all excellent. The best impression I got from this trailer was that it looked juvenile. It was like The Simpsons in space, a bunch of idiots on a bridge while the young cool crew, the young cool smart mouth kids really run the ship. Well, I guess we can do better now and wait and see. As always, thanks for providing a sliver of sanity in these crazy times. Man, I can't read. I'm losing it. Your brother in fandom, peace and long life, Jim Kevins. Yeah, I hope it's good. I want Lower Decks to be good. I'm going to reserve judgment until I actually see it, but please, God, be good. Please, 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 please be good. Saban Erdman writes in and says, hey, Rob, a few weeks ago you were talking about actors playing someone they are not. When Disney and Marvel cast Charles Xavier in the MCU, do you think the studio should cast a paraplegic actor? Not necessarily, because maybe Xavier is not in a wheelchair when we first meet him, like he wasn't in X-Men First Class. It depends. But even if he is, I don't necessarily think so. I mean, again, it all comes down to who is going to put more butts in the seats. It has to come down to that. Which actor is going to be a bigger draw? An unknown that you've cast because he actually can't walk, or a guy like Patrick Stewart who's pretending he can't walk because he's an actor? It's a tough one. I don't think that you would have to hire a paraplegic actor of some kind to do that. Like you said, I don't think so. I really don't. Omar94 is here with more suggestions. Hi, Rob. I wanted to give you, your moderators, and viewers 5 movie recommendations, which I like and I think are underappreciated. So here goes. My first recommendation is a 1962 comedy called That Touch of Mink, starring Cary Grant and Doris Day. It was directed by Delbert Mann, who made the Oscar-winning movie Marty. I love that movie. My second recommendation is a 1986 dark comedy called Ruthless People, starring Danny DeVito, Bette Midler, Judge Reinhold, and Bill Pullman. My third recommendation is the 1988 comedy called Big Business, which also stars Bette Midler along with Lily Tomlin. My fourth recommendation is a 1994 Coen Brothers movie called The Hudsucker Proxy. I love that. Starring Tim Robbins, Jennifer Jason Leigh, and Paul Newman. Just a heads up, the movie doesn't resolve all the plot points by the end, but I still enjoyed it, and it's visually one of the most beautiful movies I've ever seen, from its cinematography and set design. My fifth and final recommendation is a 1997 James Mangold film called Copland, starring Sylvester Stallone, Ray Liotta, Robert De Niro, Harvey Keitel, Robert Patrick, and Michael Rappaport. Those are my 5 recommendations: That Touch of Mink, Ruthless People, Big Business, Hudsucker Proxy, and Copland. All of those sound good to me. Absolutely. So, yes. Suddenly I just got really tired. Then I realized, oh, I've only been talking on the internet since, since 9 o'clock this morning. I'm like, why am I? It's rough. It's rough out there. Mukbang sends in a chat and says, it was good to see you back on the John Campea show today. Your banter is priceless. Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. It was good to be back, Mukbang. It was good to be back. It had been since June 17th I'd been on his show. Bunyan Snipes sends in a super chat and says, was the swimmer really John Drake? That's very funny. That is a reference to The Prisoner. It'd be hard to explain, but that's a good one. I like that. Bunyan, I appreciate that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to an end of Robservations episode number 467. My God, what a fun day. Nice quick little chat with Bryan Singer. Thank you to him. I want to thank my moderating staff. I want to thank Greg Smith. I want to thank Mike Bodden. I want to thank Jordy Lyons, Haynock, but I especially want to thank the Richard, who just brings mirth-filled fun to the channel every day, running his watch parties at the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page and at the Whining About Movies Facebook page. So go find him and tell him I said he was a great guy. So thank you for all of that, and thank you for all the support. If you want to write me letters, please write me letters. I can't even speak. Please write me letters today at the Burnettwork.net website. You can also send videos today. You can send me anything, really, at the Burnettwork.net website, and find where it says to submit. But ladies and gentlemen, kind souls, gentle beings from across the 28 known galaxies, however you identify, I want to say thank you very much. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I say, as always, what do I say? I say, have a better day.